Welcome everyone, Simon here from the Whales of Wall Street. We have an AVAX Avalanche video for you guys today, something I haven't covered on the channel for a long time. It's something that's caught my interest more recently because of the price point and having known what Avalanche is about and what they're connected with at the moment. It's definitely of interest to me for sure to make my first accumulations into my portfolio. We'll go into a bit more detail about that shortly. Before we do, please make sure, if you haven't done so already, smash that subscribe button and hit the like button as well, so we can make sure that this channel gets out to as many people as possible, so we can continue our education to the masses in the blockchain crypto sphere. So welcome if you are new to the channel, and obviously welcome back if you've been with us for some time. The numbers are growing, which is fantastic, and thank you for that excellent support, guys. And obviously check out the other videos. More recently, a great interesting interview with Andre Casterman a few days, it's actually about a week or so ago now, which is crazy. And more recently as well, last Friday, based on high demand, I did an interesting video around the portfolio that I have, or my holdings that I have, why I hold them, and certainly some learnings from the last 5 years as well. So hopefully people find that interesting. Go check that out. Avalanche and AVAX, of which is not in that list that I hold, but that might be about to change this week. We'll go into a bit more detail in a second. First and foremost, with Avalanche, I just wanted to start here. So the digital pound, which is something that's orientated around the central bank digital currency formats that are coming into play right now around the world. Masses of pilots going on at the moment. Interchangeable aspects in terms of the interoperability between banks worldwide, testing pilots, namings around things like Product Jura, Helvetia, Icebreaker, you name it. There's loads of different ones. Rosalind was one of the most newest ones, which was heavily involving the likes of Quant as an example. But this whole point that I'm making here is Avalanche is something we covered a while back, probably a couple years ago, when the Digital Pound Foundation, the organization that's helping towards advising around this system and bringing all that networking capability of partnerships and integrating partners coming together under one roof as they build this digital pound potentially over the next year or so. Avalanche is heavily involved in these areas as well. Along with, of course, the utilization of Ethereum, which is pretty natural, to be honest. But arguably, Avalanche for a while now has essentially boasted not just humongous transactions per second parts of its technology. In fact, we'll go on to that in a moment as well, because that may advance significantly with some of the protocol changes and developments that they've been working on. But one in particular is the low cost of the transaction fees and the power that it has, as well as potential kind of integrations of partnerships with the likes, as we've said before, with all these other partners within the Digital Pound Foundation's ecosystem, particularly things like existing payment frameworks such as Visa, which are absolutely huge. I think pretty much everyone uses Visa, or at least through a debit card, things like this, where it becomes really interesting and exciting to see that kind of development. I think in the past there's been like just over kind of 4,500-ish transactions per second. I'll get my words out in a minute, in terms of per its subnet, and that's pretty substantial anyway. I think Visa in itself contributes not too many around that area. I think it's slightly less, but when you had these blockchain technologies on top of them, you're talking about the verification, the processing aspects, the transparency, everything that you associate with blockchain being added on or integrated with existing systems. So there's a really interesting networking capability that's going to be occurring over these coming years. Really interesting to see that for sure. But there's one thing in relation to the digital pound where they mention a lot about the Avalanche model, not necessarily in comparison with the Ethereum, but how it can work together or on top of Ethereum, and certainly with the utilization of the Ethereum virtual machines, the EVMs going on as well. And particularly from the smart contract aspect, this is quite interesting. So they do mention throughout this paper that smart contracts aren't fully necessary in a CBDC system, other than to an extent, but there's other functionalities of Avalanche that work significantly well that can accommodate a CBDC system. Predominantly talking here about PIPs and ESIPs. This is heavily relating to some of the ecosystem models, the central bank digital currencies that are going on at the moment with the Bank of England. So it says here about payment interface providers or external service interface providers. So major banks, small fintechs, established technology companies, wallet providers, charities or non-governmental organizations could all find a niche in enabling payments using a digital pound on providing complementary services such as budgeting tools. Competition and innovation would thrive in this new market for digital pound services, resulting in a greater degree of choice for the end user. So about that point of not just focusing on one or two chains or one or two projects or companies, they're utilizing a lot of different ones in their ecosystem. Avalanche is one of those. It's certainly something we picked up on when we introduced you guys to the Digital Pound Foundation and what was actually going on with the digital pound in terms of CBDC frameworks moving forward as we enter that phase now, the final phases of piloting, testing into that 2025 model where we see the RTGS system, the remittance system financially worldwide being switched over to a proper digital format in 2024 as the engine gets switched on, and with a notation there of November 2025 being the period of time where the whole world switches completely into this new system, and arguably, in my opinion, will be the foundation of CBDCs to be introduced to the general public and utilized as an actual framework and solution to the world. It's quite exciting. But we revert back to that previous conversation about transactions per second. This is important because not just within CBDCs, which are arguably potentially programmable, but everything that we do moving forward will be utilizing things like AI, IoT, and blockchain collectively, albeit you as an end user won't have a clue how this works. You just use it. And this is the defining moments that we're in these next couple of years. And transactions per second is something that people kind of boast about or chains boast about, and there's no real kind of like recognition as to what that actually kind of indicates or what that actually means. Because people keep associating it with just financial implications. For example, me sending you money, you could call that a transaction. We always kind of accumulate in our minds that transactions are just financial based, when actually the transfer of an action, where the wording comes from, can accommodate pretty much anything and everything that we do, whether it be supply chain management areas, buying and selling things in general. It could be harvesting, it could be drone deliveries. I've mentioned these case study or examples many, many times, but every single movement, every single component or communication, even a communication between one device to another, particularly that Internet of Things, the IoT spectrum, whether it be a camera talking to a smart plug or whatever, can be a transfer of an action. And this is where we start accommodating an entire spider web, for a better terminology, if you like, of everything working simultaneously together. And in order to achieve that in a mass scale, because bear in mind, guys, how many people live in your own countries out there? You know, we're talking about millions upon billions of people around the world. They'll be interacting digitally, again, not just in banking, anything and everything that we do. And that will require substantial power behind it in terms of the transfer of actions, the transactions per second, hence the complexity behind it and the demand for higher numbers. But on top of that, all of these things going on simultaneously need to be tracked and traced, and they need to be validated, processed, and huge layers of privacy, security on top of those. So when we have the orientation of AI, supply and demand algorithms, with the use of IoT, i.e. the actual hardware, if you like, for all these things to work, sometimes software, of course, and then blockchain on top of that to adapt the speed at which this is done, the validating, the processing, the transparency. Now, as I've said before, many chains boast big numbers, but this is really interesting. And please put this into the context. It's like when you look at cars and they tell you how many miles you can get, or miles per gallon, and they tend to do the testing in-house in controlled environments, and actually the numbers are a lot lower. However, even if you knocked 50% off this number that I'm about to read out, it's quite substantial and probably still conservative and generous. I do still think it could do this. Avalanche's HyperSDK blockchain upgrade hits 143,000 transactions per second on testnet. Now, this information was released a few days ago. I think originally probably earlier this month in September, but this is absolutely staggering. And to build on their own virtual machines as well. So it's a true competitor to Ethereum to an extent. And it boasts significant TPS on top of any of the other chains out there. It mentions a few here, and these are always evolving, by the way, guys. Just take this with a pinch of salt, because chains will evolve. There's no doubt about it, and they need to accommodate all these things we just mentioned. And it says here about Ethereum only being able to do like between 15 and 20, the cost of it, but it's a very reliable chain. It's been there for a long time. Other chains and other projects build on Ethereum, hence the AVAX protocols and the wallet addresses, etc. But the EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine, has allowed companies to really operate with Ethereum in different and better ways over these last year or so. But this is really, really interesting. And I think what we're going to see over these next 5-10 years as developments continue, we'll see a lot of chains disappear off the face of the earth. We'll see a lot of projects disappear in general anyway. But I think it's going to be an exciting time for companies out there, projects out there, to really define themselves, to really evolve themselves and keep building on top of the protocols that they're already building on. And particularly from the smart contract aspect, this is very important. But as it says here, they've clocked it at 141,000, but that's in a very controlled environment. So if you think you would cut that in half, it would still be very generous and probably will do more than that. I mean, even if you had a quarter of that number, it's substantially higher than any chains out there, to be honest. I mean, some boast up to 50,000 in general anyway, again, under controlled environments. I don't pay too much attention to it because we have seen pure evidence of this with some chains boasting big numbers. But when the actual network capacity comes in, particularly in the bull markets, when people are buying and selling, and also people adapting the tokens for utility in terms of developing and building on those chains, it dries up quite quickly, and we have slowness within the network's reactions through the systems or wallets that we use. So again, pinch of salt, but it's very interesting indeed to see they're testing at these higher levels with great accuracy and success. Who knows what the real world use case will be, but it indicates the points that we're making, that the ecosystems and partners that you have to have in these CBDC projects, as well as many projects relating to blockchain in general around the world, they have to start progressing significantly higher than what they've already fantastically, by the way, been achieving already. So it's really exciting to see this. And just a bit of a notation here from February 21, introducing HyperSDK. This is how long the progression has taken, a couple of years really in that instance to get to these points. So mentioning here about VMs, virtual machines, one of the most powerful ways to build on Avalanche, HyperSDK is designed to simplify and accelerate custom VM development, making it safer and easier to launch your own optimized blockchain. So they're offering this out for people to build their own blockchains within this system, rather than going to the likes of Ethereum, for example, which we've already mentioned, has a lot of cons to it, as well as some really interesting pros as well. Lightning fast execution, low cost, of course, but this was written way before those numbers came out, those significant numbers came out the last few days around this. And to show that development, that progression is quite substantial. The timing, very interesting as well. As I mentioned, piloting of CBDC system is ramping up significantly around the world, and particularly with the digital pound. And the fact that Avalanche are getting more and more involved in the webinars, the conversations, the panels at the Digital Pound Foundation events, it's ticking all the boxes in my mind. So I've already knew about Avalanche. I already knew about the progress it's making. It's great to see these results coming out, albeit they're conservative, they're based on controlled environments, etc. But it shows you the opportunity here. So these in mind as points, it reverts back to my point initially about the price point of Avalanche. I don't have this in my portfolio. I haven't done since the beginning. And I have always kept track of it. We've always done a couple of videos here and there on it. The previous all-time high, guys, by the way, was around $148, I believe. And it's currently floating around the $9 mark. Now, this is the lowest it's been for some time. In fact, the last point it came back to this area was July 2021. Not too far after their announcements back at the beginning of February, when it announced those increase opportunities of like the HyperSDK. And of course, then the big, huge ramp up the whole entire market saw throughout the end of the 2021 period. So it's really interesting because if they start announcing these things a bit more, certainly in bull market areas or when the cycle of a bull market is about to begin, we could see some significant higher numbers than we are on right now. So going back to that point that we haven't seen these price points since July 2021, the most recent time it's come to a near about price point around $10 was earlier this year in December. I say earlier this year, it's like 9 months ago now, which is crazy. But again, to that point about the $9 area, if you go back further than that to the lower positions of that, not too far off its launch period, to be honest, January 2021. Okay. Now, if I zoom in a bit more, I haven't moved these charts around simply because I wanted to keep this data apparent for the now conversation as well as the past. So we can see we're currently balancing ourselves on this fib level. I haven't moved this. This is done in the last video, whenever that was. In fact, it must have been a long, long time ago because I removed these color spectrums probably well over a year and a half, I think, ago. So we now use the plain ones for visibility purposes. But it's interesting to see this. So we're hitting this area. This gives me two indications. We've had a couple of orientations around this price point, as I said, December 2022, more recently, June 2023, and they've seen resistance, they've seen support, and they've pulled themselves back up. However, each time we've seen lower lows. Okay, so we've tried to do this again around this area back here in August. It's relatively failed after a few days of stabilization and it's drawing itself down. This is where it gets really interesting because at the fib level, retracement level, the data points around there, if that breaks, guys, we could potentially see, and bear in mind as well, I'm just going to reiterate this, if I just take that to that point, there are a couple of areas of interest within these points that we could take advantage of between this light green area and the red area down here, for which we can probably get that data, to be honest, from putting it to the most recent times all the way up to that level there. If I really zoom in, you can see the areas of interest where we could see some bobble effects, some rebounds, some resistance and support. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to go, oh my goodness, from $9.44 immediately down to $6.48. This is just a long-term area of interest that could potentially come in easily, which reflects back on some of the launch areas as well as some of the lower points that we saw back here in 2020, which dragged it around that sort of $3 or $4 mark. So it's definitely possible because we've got a lack of data suggesting that there's significant support areas of where we are right now. So my mindset here is to do a bit of DCAing. This is not financial advice. This is what I'm going to be doing this week. I'm just waiting for 2 more days of stability here to see what's going on. But I'm not too unhappy about accumulating at this current area if the stabilization occurs. The RSIs on the bottom left, guys, are quite low. 30 on the 14-day, 28 days showing 33. This is very low, and it's a good bite point. I'll probably do this in the next 24 hours personally, for my own benefit and my own portfolio. Now, on these lower areas, they don't look too many or too much, but it actually is. A good $3 reduction to take it to that red area is around $6.63 on that market. It's not always 100% accurate, but it gives you a reflection of a potential area of interest. There are some areas to accumulate on these regions too. So I will be DCAing at this area because it could potentially bounce back based on the fact that we've seen support at these areas a couple of times all around this region. But my mindset is sitting here going, okay, the data points underneath this, we have to retest this to go into a proper bull market with a good foundation for Avalanche as a price point. So I will be taking some initiatives around here at the lower $8 regions. I'll put these limit orders in when I buy these ones as well. And potentially, we'll look at that $7 mark just above it and potentially slightly below it as well as we enter those potential periods of the $6.50 mark. But I'm going to leave those 3 in there for now. That's where I'm going to put my limit orders. I'll have a manual order for this one, and I'll put limit orders, bit of capital in there to try and grab some of those potential areas. Because if we do have a swing around, guys, which I do anticipate with the development that's occurring with Avalanche, and typically speaking with majority of cycles, not always they go back to the previous all-time high. It really depends on the stability of the project, the longevity, what they're developing, the announcements, etc. But in the instance that they do for this time round, let's say over the next 18 months, for an example, leading up to that 2025 period, we take that existing price point of around $9.10 and we go back to that all-time high previously. We're looking at a significant gain opportunity. 1,000 500% roughly. Now, if we hit those areas, which by the way, guys, if you see this pattern around here between 2021 and 2022 respectively, you'll see a lot of that going on, but at higher regions. And this is where it gets really interesting as a defining point, because if we take the next levels, these are the sort of indicator points that people might want to take profits along the way as we hit those areas. But just for argument's sake, if we do hit that longer term fib level from its current price point that we're at now to take it to around $240, that's a 2,500% gain opportunity. So for me, yes, there's a higher risk in the sense of the value of this token right now compared to many of the 1 cent tokens, etc. I'm not interested in the price points. I'm interested in the gains. You could put $100 in something and not own a whole one of something. But the fact of the matter is that $100 turning into a plus 2,500 or a 1,500% gain is way more interesting to me than what the value or the price point of the token actually is. That's where it gets really interesting. And that's where we take the psychology element into it. Because a lot of people just go, oh, £5, £7 is too cheap, or it's too much. Well, don't buy a whole one then. Buy whatever your valuation of your money that you're putting in is doing so. And look at the gains. Look at the gains, not the value price points and such. That's where I find it most intriguing and most important when I'm reflecting on the fact that, okay, I understand the price point. Yes, it's higher than most other valuations of projects out there. But look at the previous all-time highs and look at the opportunities within that as well. The DCA opportunities on the way up. We're at the lower regions now. And I said, risk assessment, risk management perspective is that DCA opportunity, the sense that there is a lack of data here. So my mindset is suggesting that there could be lower areas than buying right now. But we remove some of that risk by saying, okay, I may be buying some at $9.50 and it may come down lower, but for the sake of argument in the future, when it does get back up to those 30 minimum marks and 40, and you're sitting there going, oh, I wish I bought more at 9 or 6 becomes almost partially irrelevant depending on how many you're trying to accumulate. So hopefully there's a bit of thought process behind there. Again, not financial advice. I'm not saying to do or don't do any of this. It's just that it's come into a really interesting area for me personally, and for me to add Avalanche to my portfolio for the first time. Let us know what you're doing with Avalanche, if you hold it or don't hold it. We've done intro videos for Avalanche before, I believe. I'll probably do an evolved one very soon, but it's interesting to me. The indicators, the performance side on the right-hand side as well, are looking quite stable. They're in negative, which is most of the market's representations anyway at the moment, to be fair. But the point being is that it's quite a stabilized overview performance-wise. If you look at the year-to-date or the monthlies or the weeklies, a lot of projects out there, because of the announcements, etc., they'll have quite skewed numbers. So it might be looking like it's having a really good month or two, but actually over the year it's terrible. Whereas this one's one of the most balanced ones, which gives the indication that there's a lot of confidence behind it. There's a lot of holders behind it, a lot of valuation behind it. The numbers, the value of which is purchased and sold each day is quite huge still on Avalanche in the charts. So it's given me good ticks in my boxes in my mind to really start thinking about this. So hopefully that's a bit of a thing to think about for you guys as well. I'm going to leave that video there. Again, let us know in the comments below if you're holding or not holding Avalanche. What do you think is so exciting about this project? We'll definitely cover this more often for sure. It has got a huge future. I've been really excited to try and accumulate this at some point, and I just feel like the area's come in to do so in the recent times. So guys, thank you so much for watching this video. We'll see you in the next Avalanche update one. Take care. Bye bye.